Okay, so everyone, this is very exciting. We have our very first guest here ever on the Who's the Boss podcast. You may know him as Mason from Who's the Boss, but you probably also don't know that Adam Carl has been on pretty much every single popular 80s show from our childhood. I'll do a quick list. Benson, Family Ties, Cheers, Newhart, The Facts of Life, Charles in Charge, Life Goes On, Designing Women, and Hearts of Fire, which I started watching this morning. Yes.
I saw it on the Amazon Prime.
Yeah, you did.
Hearts of Fire.
Please welcome Adam Carl. Hello.
Oh, hi. Based on my credits, people will probably think I'm like 75 years old.
Listen, you were very little.
I'm like, Benson, how old is this guy?
You were tiny on Cheers. How old were you on Cheers?
I was actually a little bit older than I look because I was always very small for my age.
Yeah, which is great.
I think I was 14 when I did that. So
okay.
I probably looked.
Wow. You really looked young on that. We just watched it
so I watched what we could get a hold of, which is Cheers, because I work for Paramount Plus. So we have that streaming. We're one of the very few people that stream Paramount Plus. So yes, we watched an episode of Cheers, and then I watched Family Ties.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and then this morning I found Hearts of Fire because I love John Ritter also anyway.
Was the best.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing.
I miss him a lot.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm kind of curious, like how you got started acting. Were you a child? Like, was it your idea?
It was my idea. My parents thought I was nuts. I grew up in Orange County, down about 10 minutes east of Disneyland, in the 70s, and I mean, from a very young age, like I remember writing a letter to the Mickey Mouse Club because I wanted to be on the cast of the Mickey Mouse Club, and getting some letter back saying, "Hey kid, you're on a waiting list," with a million other kids.
Right.
But it was always something I wanted to do, and then when I got into about 6th grade and I was doing, school plays and things, there was an ad in the newspaper. So this would have been 1982, maybe.
Okay.
There was an ad in the paper for an open call for a movie at 20th Century Fox. And they were looking for kids, my age, to be the lead in this movie with Richard Dreyfuss and Susan Sarandon. And it was called The Buddy System. It was not a successful film.
Okay.
It was sort of similar. I don't know if you ever saw Richard Dreyfuss in The Goodbye Girl, but it kind of had a sort of a similar vibe to that movie.
Okay.
And so, of course, my dad saw this ad in the LA Times and was like, "Hey, you should go." And I was like, "Yes, absolutely." And my mom was really "I'm so worried that you're going to get rejected and it's going to hurt your feelings." And, she was just so worried about protecting me from that. And I was like, "I don't care. It's fine. I'm not expecting to get it." So my dad's like, "I'm going to take him." So it was the day, it was a Saturday or something. It was the day I had a Little League game. So I went in my Little League uniform because I had to go to the game right afterwards.
Right.
And it was on the Fox lot on a sound stage, and they had set up like a big, picnic table or something. And they were just taking kids in 7 at a time and sitting us all down and just sort of going down the line and asking us questions. And we had to fill out, a form, do you have an agent? What's your agent's phone number? That sort of thing. And I didn't have an agent, but my 6th grade teacher, her grown son had an agent in LA. And so she said to me, "Listen, if they ask you who your agent is, just tell them my son's agent's name." And so, I didn't know anything, so I did. And I write this down. And it turns out this agent did not represent kids. He only represented adults. He had no idea who I was. And basically called my parents and said, "So your son apparently wrote my name down. I have no idea who he is. And by the way, he has a callback."
Nice.
And my mom made me call him up and apologize to him for, putting his name down. And he just thought this was the cutest thing in the world. And he said, "Look, I will represent you through this process. And maybe I've never represented a kid before. I'll see how it goes. And if it doesn't work out, I can recommend some kids agents to you." And I ended up getting this process went on and on and on for this movie. I kept getting callback after callback, and they were whittling it down until by the end it was down to, and they were like, they were messengering screenplays to my house in Orange County for me. I'd never read a script before. Like, this was all like super exciting, and like, it got down to me and one other kid, and that kid was Will Wheaton.
Oh,
wow.
Stand By Me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it was between the two of us, and it took like 2 weeks, and the head of Fox at that time was a woman named Sherry Lansing, and it was like taking a really long time for them to decide. And ultimately, because my character was not supposed to be Richard Dreyfuss's kid, he's supposed to be Susan Sarandon's kid, and I looked like Richard Dreyfuss, and Will looked more like Susan, and didn't have that Jewish energy. So that was one of the reasons, but also he was probably that better. So Will got the part, and I was disappointed, but like, my mom's worst fears did not come true. Like, I didn't fall apart or anything.
Right.
And then they called back maybe a week or so later and offered me like a very small role as a friend of his in like a Thanksgiving school pageant. I played an ear of corn. A big ear of corn costume, and that was like, and I ended up doing that, and that was my first professional job.
Nice. Well, I mean, you should have been amazingly proud of yourself, because an open call, I mean, there was probably thousands of kids there,
it was
right?
pretty cool. I have to say, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's impressive.
And and that agent, he represented me for a little while, and then he decided like it's probably better if you're with a kid's agent, and he recommended someone to me, and I just sort of kept working after that. Like, I never really stopped until I got later into my late teens.
Yeah. I know those when you go to the auditions, we've taken our children to a few different maybe commercials.
Yeah, when they were younger.
And then they would ask, and then they were like, "No, I don't want to." Yes, I do. They were wishy-washy about it. But I remember going, and it was like a cattle call. Like, they pull them all in.
It really was. It was just like a room just full of kids and stage moms, and there was one stage mom that used to bring like hairspray and like do her kids' hair like in the room, in the lobby, and you're just going, "This is awful."
I know.
And my mom, that was my mom's biggest fear, is that she was not a stage mother at all. And the best thing my parents ever did for me is, when this all started, they sat me down and said, "We're going to support you in this, and we'll drive you to auditions, and we'll take you, and we'll sit with you on the set with you. The minute this is more fun for us than it is for you, you're done."
Right. Yeah, that's great.
That probably was never fun for them.
Great thing they ever said. Never fun. It never got to that point where it was more fun for them.
Yeah.
I remember she would call me, Tori would call me in the morning, "They have an audition tonight." Then it's like, "Okay, well, where? Down in Culver City. You have to be there at 5:30.
Right.
And then we're in the Valley. Okay,
Yeah.
well, I better leave it too then.
Right.
And you drive all the way down there through traffic for a thing that was
10
6
minutes.
minutes or
Yeah.
whatever.
And
And
I
you
was
drive
driving
all the way
Orange
back
County,
home.
I was driving
That's all. Yeah.
2 hours
yeah.
traffic home, and all that.
Wow.
Wow.
But you wanted it.
I
So-
really wanted it. Yeah.
And that is interesting, that because there was a recent article with Will Wheaton about how much he didn't want it.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that about him.
Yeah, well, so it was very recent, I think, just in the last week or
in the last week or so.
where he said that he pulled a lot of his anger and sadness that he used in Stand By Me because of his own emotional abuse, and that
That's really interesting.
he never wanted to be an actor, and he was kind of pushed into it.
Wow.
So yeah,
Wow.
I couldn't, but yeah.
I haven't seen him in many, many, many years, but we have, some mutual friends in common. And I liked him a lot back, when we worked on it together, but that was, 30 something,
Yes.
40 something.
Crazy.
Okay. So tell me a little bit about, like, all right, you walk onto the set of Cheers, right?
Yes.
Do you understand at that point how big Cheers is?
I do. And the story, I was terrified. And the reason I was terrified was because everyone on set so terrible. Whatever, I'll tell the story.
No,
It's
please.
been a long time, and
Yes.
I don't think there are any secrets here.
Yeah.
Apparently, at the time that I did the show, Ted Danson and this was still when Shelley Long was on the show, and apparently they were not getting along.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the night before, the story I had been told, at least on the day, was that the night before, which had been their tape night from the previous episode, they had been there like all night because there had been like a big blowout and people going off to their respective dressing rooms and not coming out, like the whole thing. So the vibe that day for like a table read for the next, it was very tense, and people were like really like, and I was of course hearing this and just absolutely terrified that this was going to be an awful, experience with mean people. And of course I saw none of that.
Okay, good.
Everyone was like, couldn't have been nicer and sweeter to me. And, it was a great week, but that moment was like, and I knew, of course I watched the show and I'm, I look up to all these people and, luckily they were all really kind. So
the most, the couple of times that I've been on a set, the most fun for me is just seeing the set. Like to just stand in the bar of Cheers or...
This is the set I grew up watching. Like, this is amazing. What am I doing here? Like,
Yeah. Even one time I visited the set of Grey's Anatomy. I've never seen Grey's Anatomy. But just standing on it and being like, this is so cool. Like, it looks so real and none of it is real. I loved it.
Really cool.
But your scene with Rhea Perlman is amazing. It was very cute.
I actually just found the other day, because God bless my mother, she was a pack rat and kept everything. So, in the scene, she like takes Polaroids of me.
Yeah.
My mom kept those Polaroids.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So I have like all these really cool Polaroids still.
Oh, that's so great.
And during the rehearsals, because they would take them during rehearsals too. So I have some that are just, and it's like me wearing like a Cheers t-shirt that I probably got, a sweatshirt that either they gave me or I bought at the studio store or something.
Right. So do you remember your audition for Who's the Boss?
I don't remember the first one.
Okay.
The casting director at the time was the late, great Vicki Rosenberg. And she was sort of someone who was really good to me over the years and very like sort of a champion. And she cast me in a few shows. So I don't know if that was the first one or if I don't know quite what the order was. Okay. So I don't remember actually auditioning for it.
So because I was wondering if like you knew going into it that you would be on 3 episodes, or if
I did not. And there's a very good story about that.
Oh, okay, great.
Oh, great.
This is good.
Right.
So I do Big Man on Campus, which is you guys fairly recently.
Yeah.
And that was the first one. And then I got a call one day from a friend of mine who was on the crew and was in the room when this supposedly happened. And she said to me, I think you're going to be on the show again. And I said, well, what makes you think that? She says, well, at the table read this morning, we finished the script and Tony got up and he was really angry. And he said, this is terrible. This is unfunny. Who wrote this crap? Threw the script, said, bring back Mason, and stormed out. And I was like, what? She's like, I'm just telling you what happened. She's like, so maybe you're going to come back soon.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
That like the next day, my agents called and said, so Who's the Boss wants to check on your availability for next week. I was like that fast. I was back. And it was supposedly because of Tony and his insistence that the character come back.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. What's great is you and Tony have such great chemistry.
Yeah, I was just about to say that.
Yeah. Like the first episode, because we're going to cover three teenagers and a Tony.
3 teens and a Tony or whatever.
Yeah,
that's the next
which
one.
is which this interview is going to go with. And in that one too, like I'm surprised that it wasn't more than 3 episodes even, because you guys had a really good rapport.
Felt like more than 3. Like I'm always reminded that it was only 3. It feels like such a big part of my life. Yeah. And at the time that it happened, I would get like recognized a lot from, because the show was, it was a hit.
Yeah.
Especially on like if it was the day after an episode had just aired. And if I was anywhere where there were like a lot of people gathered, like it was like Disneyland or a movie theater, people would recognize Mason, which I of course hated. I was like super uncomfortable and embarrassed because if 1 out of 100 people recognize me, the other 99 are like, who's that asshole? Like, why is he? So I felt stupid. I would be like, I'm nobody. Don't. There's nothing to see here. And I remember once being in a movie theater with my parents, and like some little girl walked over to me and she said, "Are you Mason on Who's the Boss.
Aw.
I was about to say, oh no, that's not me. And my mother goes, he sure is, honey. and, and the little girl turns to about like 20 people she's with and goes, it's him, come on. And like a whole like thing of people. And I'm like mortified, like hiding my face. And
that little girl was me. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, you still had that autograph. No, but so it did feel like a little bit more like 3 episodes. And in the third one, which you guys will get to, I think, next season.
Yes.
It really is mostly a me and Tony thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a Mason and Samantha. It's a Mason and Tony.
Right. Yeah, I haven't rewatched that one only because I'm really trying not to rewatch until we get there. Yeah, so it's a little fresher. But yeah, so that was my question too. Like so at this point you're in high school, right?
I was 16 and 17, I guess, when I did both those episodes. So
does being on TV shows help your social standing or make it harder?
That's really an interesting question. I'm not entirely sure because, growing up, I was very small for my age. And I felt like, like any shrimpy kid, I was, bullied a little bit, but nothing terrible. And I always had a lot of friends, but I felt, I think, a little bit like a social outcast a lot growing up, certainly in elementary school. And also I was the one of the few Jewish kids in an overwhelmingly conservative evangelical Orange County,
Right.
It wasn't exactly my, I felt out of place for most of my life there. And of course, once I got to LA and started acting with grownups, and I felt like I'd found my people and my community. And so when I got to high school, I was working so much and doing independent study, with studio teachers, that I ended up leaving my big, typical Orange County high school that had, however many thousand kids, and went to a tiny little school in Hollywood that Alyssa had actually also gone to, which catered to kids who were actors. There was 35 students from ages from grades 7 through 12. So it's this little 3-room school.
Wow.
We did school for 3.5 hours a day. And they worked closely with the studio teachers to do sort of, give you independent study and work with you on what you were doing. And so many of the kids I went to school with at that point then were actors like me.
Right.
And so of course, we all were peas in a pod.
Right.
And my social life. And also, that was the age, 16, where because my parents didn't want me driving back and forth to Orange County every night, I ended up getting a place with a friend. And so here I was, a teenager with my own place.
Wow.
Living on my own, but still going to school every day and not being a delinquent.
Right.
But living, it was still teenagers living by themselves. You can imagine.
Yes, that's amazing. That's a kid's dream.
It was
amazing. Yeah, it was great. So my social life was great at that point. I don't know what it might have been like had I stayed back in Orange County.
Right.
When I first started, some kids thought it was really cool, and other kids would basically want to be don't get too big for your britches, kid. You're still a little shrimp, but I'm still gonna put you in the trash can.
Aww.
So there was a little bit of both, I think.
Right. So what did you think about the character of Mason?
I loved Mason.
Yeah.
I have to say,
Mason too.
Most of the things I've done in my career, I look back, I cringe a little bit. And especially if I watch it again and I think, oh my God, I could have been so much better and I was terrible or it wasn't funny. And that's one of the few that I still am proud of. I liked Mason a lot as a character. And, I was basically just doing a kid's version of a Woody Allen impression. That was my bad Woody Allen impression. And the line that I always say was from this episode to my girlfriend to make her laugh is when Tony offers me the sleeping bag and I'm like, is this down? Because I'm allergic to down. It's like Woody shtick.
Right.
Yeah.
Packing my underwear around my humidifier.
Exactly. And I think I got a sense early on that was sort of funny for a teenage kid or a kid to do. Mm-hmm. And so I would go into auditions and that was sort of my default delivery. I would just sort of I'd go, you know what, if they're looking for something different, they're going to be looking for something different anyway, but let me see if this works.
Right.
And oftentimes it did, it would get a laugh or whatever. It was something different than other kids were doing.
Yeah. going back. Sorry, going back to the episode we just did, or we're going to do. Again, the chemistry with you and Tony is really great. Like the way he's so, I don't know if it's scripted or whatever, but it's like he's always calling you Mace. Like, you know what I mean? Like you guys go way back.
The forehead rubs. And
right. And it's almost like that you're his son.
It was just Tony. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
Tony,
that's what I figured.
I think it helped that I think he genuinely liked me, and I really liked him. And, with Tony, it's like what you see is what you get. That's him. He's very gregarious and he's very affectionate. And I mean, I'll never forget every night right before taping, big kiss on the lips, and it was just this, Italian, affectionate, gregarious thing. And I loved it. I mean, it was great.
Yeah, we have heard quite a few stories about Tony getting angry on set or having blow-ups and stuff, but it seems like you had a different experience.
I saw like a little bit of it, but I remember hearing a story that was, it got to the point where like with Alyssa and Judith, like, they knew him so well. And it was such a thing. And when he would blow up, but quickly get over it, And so I think if I remember correctly, he would like have one of those moments where he would like get upset and they would like, Judith and Alyssa would be like, that was like, what would you say? Like a 7.2 on the Tony scale. And they would just like, that bit and he would laugh and it would all be like, blown over,
Right. So can you tell me a little bit about like the process. So like you get the script and then there's a table read and the rehearsals.
So it starts with a table read, and back then it was like that was all you did that day. Like you did the table read and you went home. It was fantastic, Right. And you wouldn't really start rehearsing till, let's say that was a Monday, you don't start rehearsing on Tuesday. And Tuesday you just start blocking it. So I have a person who's in the background now.
Hello, person.
That would be Sarah walking around there.
Hi, Sarah.
Hello.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. I won't.
No, you're fine. Yeah. We're very casual here.
We're in an Airbnb right now because our house has been being renovated for the last 10 months. So we were placed at the moment. But it's a whole thing. But then Tuesday you would start like getting on its feet and blocking it, and then maybe and then Wednesday comes and you continue to do that and refine it and run through it. And by the end of the day, then the network comes and the network sits there and watches the run through at the end of the day and gives notes. And then, so you come back on the next day and maybe there's like all kinds of changes. There's lines have been things have been punched up because they've done rewrites based on the network notes. And then usually Thursday would be like camera blocking day, where it would just be about getting all of the camera moves down and getting all the blocking. And so it was a more technical day, but then you'd still run through it for the network again at the end of Thursday. And there'd be a whole new round of notes. Wow. There'd be like new pages, Friday morning, the day of the taping, that you'd have to like work in. And then, Friday night you would tape it usually twice. You tape it for one audience, have dinner, come back, tape it again.
Okay.
And if it went on too long on like the second taping, they'd like send the audience home and you just keep going if they needed to get more stuff.
Oh, interesting.
But and that didn't always happen. Sometimes you just got it and it was quick and it was in and out and you're done,
Yeah, we have heard that it was like one take, maybe two, as much as possible on Who's the Boss. Did you see? That
show was one of those quick ones where you weren't there all night. It was just like, you did it, they got it, you're out.
Right.
Wow.
It was a well-oiled machine for sure.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Now, is it hard? It seems like you had a good rapport with people, but when you jump into a cast like that as the guest star, it's got to be sink or swim. Like if you don't keep up.
It is. And it's funny. You always feel, because you're like a guest in someone else's home.
Right.
And you're walking on eggshells a little bit until you get a sense of what the personalities are and how people are going to treat you. They were great. It always felt like going back home, when I would go back and do another episode with them.
Yeah.
Very warm, very welcoming, but you never know and by the time you sort of get your sea legs, the week is over,
right.
And you're done.
Right.
I can remember doing one show where the joke I've made is I was in a scene with this actor and I still haven't met him, because even though it was like his show, and he was the star. He didn't do what most stars do, which is sort of they act like a goodwill ambassador for the show, and they're very welcoming and very. And he was just sort of distant, and I never really talked to him between takes, and it was just sort of like I was there, but never really felt like I even like met the guy.
Wow.
That sort of thing.
Quick question about your spot on Family Ties.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I watched this, but Kevin didn't see this one. But you play a young, what is the dad's name? Stephen.
Yes, young Stephen Keaton.
Yes.
Young Michael Gross.
Right. So all of your scenes were so removed. So did you interact with the cast at all in that situation?
Yeah, because we were there together all week.
Okay.
And when you're rehearsing these scenes, the scene right before might have been them reminiscing before the flashback or something, and the scene right after might be them. So you're all still right there.
Oh, I see. So they really did do all of those in front of the studio audience.
Right, exactly.
Okay, gotcha.
And in fact, at the time that I did that, Michael J. Fox was shooting Back to the Future. And I can remember he was constantly like going back and forth throughout the week and was exhausted, as you might imagine, like trying to still do the show and film at the same time,
Wow.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. And I was also doing, because as a kid, you're doing 3 hours of school with the studio teacher. So like Tina Yothers and I would be in school together, sitting in a room doing our homework or whatever with the same studio teacher.
So did you have to do that on all the shows? So like when you were on Who's the Boss, you would have to do school with?
Your school, always at least 3 hours a day. And, some kids would get like around 16 years old would get emancipated so that they didn't have to do that. And I wasn't going to although I was living on my own, I was not officially emancipated.
Right.
And I continued to go to school. But once the labor laws had changed. So, it was 3 hours. And the same person who was the studio teacher was also the welfare worker who was there just to make sure that you were being, treated okay and everything was safe. And then at 16, it changed at some point where you didn't have to have the welfare worker part anymore. So once school was done, they could go away and you could be there without them for the rest of the day. As long as you were signed out at the appropriate time for, you can only work a certain amount of hours.
Right. And
every so often, some production, some like assistant director or producer would say like, can you stay longer?
Right.
And no.
Right. And did your parents still have to be with you at that point?
At 16, no, they didn't have to be anymore. So
nice. Interesting.
And what's funny was that my mom, who was a teacher, ended up becoming close with a lot of my studio teachers.
Right.
And she ended up becoming a studio teacher herself and had a long career doing that. And a much more successful career than I had. She was like working on Steven Spielberg movies, and she was Haley Joel Osment's longtime studio teacher, and they like traveled around the world together and stuff. So it was cool. So my career sort of gave her a whole new second career.
Yeah. Okay, so I have to ask now, in this episode, Mason and Samantha kiss.
Yes, they do.
Was that your first on-screen kiss?
I think it may have been. For some reason, I may have not. Maybe not. For some reason, I kept having to kiss people in shows, which I never. It's very strange. And not exactly Robert Redford. And I'll never forget. I was when I filming this episode right before. Because I hadn't moved out yet, and my mom didn't want me driving back and forth all week, so I stayed with my best friend, who was also a kid actor, whose name was Ryan Lambert. He was on Kids Incorporated back in the 80s, and he was living in his manager's guest house, which was right around the corner from Sunset Gower, where we shot Who's the Boss. And so I just crashed with him that week, two teenagers, in some guest house in Hollywood, and they were going to deliver the script to where we were, to his guest house, and he goes, I bet you can have to kiss her. And I was like, you are such an idiot. No way in hell Mason is going to kiss anyone. You don't even know what my character is. They would never write that. It was never happen. And then, of course, I get the script and start, nope, you're right. I got to kiss her. I was a little nervous, of course, because it's always awkward. And you're sure, like, do we do it in the rehearsal or do we wait for the tape night? Like, how do we navigate this?
Yeah. What do you, I would imagine that
we just started doing it in rehearsal.
Okay, yeah.
It just was very natural.
Yeah.
Except for Tony kind of hovering and making sure it didn't go longer than 3 seconds.
Right.
Like, all right, that's enough.
Right. And it's a pretty...
we get it. Okay, we're good. Move on.
It's a pretty chaste kiss. Like, I could see if there's a kiss with a lot of tongue involved, you'd maybe not want to do that until the cameras were on.
I think Tony was protective of Alyssa,
Yeah, we've heard a few stories about that, too, about how he would... There were always guys coming around on set and stuff that he would want to shoo away, which I think is really sweet.
My friend Ryan actually tells that story a lot. He said he thinks he was one of those guys. Tony did not like me when I was hanging out with Alyssa. He's like, he thinks he was like banned from the set,
Right. Probably. But I think it's probably what also made them have a good sort of chemistry, because he really did have, she jokes that she had 2 Italian fathers.
That's right.
Okay, so now when I was watching the episode, I realized that Mason could have possibly predicted the reboot, because he says to Tony,
the chock full of nuts story, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, listen, if they don't seize on that.
Yes.
It's very
I'm really hoping, okay, first of all, we don't know what's happening with the reboot, because
it kind of went into like
the news. It was like the big announcement.
It was like the announcement, and there was a couple of articles here and there, and now it's faded into obscurity.
But I really hope that they will bring back some guest stars for sure, and I think Mason would be a fantastic one, because
I can't disagree with you. But
of course not.
But yeah, the whole chock full of nuts story. Come on, he says 30 years from now, I'm going to run into her somewhere.
Right. He actually says 15, but we'll go ahead with 30.
Okay. We'll go with 30.
Yeah. Well, it's because it's funny, because what does he say? He says 2003.
2003, because later on it comes up again. He says
I know, and that probably seemed so far in the future.
I'm going to kill myself.
And now
it's so far in the past. I know. But yeah, so 30 years later.
30 years, like Jesus.
Yeah. Samantha walks into a Starbucks, because there are no chock full of nuts anymore.
But is Mason the barista, or
he's a barista? Still working on his thesis,
No way.
No. Mason is some sort of
like a .com tech billionaire or something.
Exactly.
There you go.
App.
Right. Yes.
I think he would be good as her kid's neurotic, godfather,
right?
Platonic godfather, always making sure that things are child-proofed in the house, even though they're teenagers, that sort of
right.
That would be great. So it's so great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Oh my God, of course, I'm happy to, and I loved listening to the podcast. You guys are delightful.
Oh, great!
Insightful as well.
It's our pandemic podcast.
It is our pandemic.
We started
podcast.
it. And
I learned something from listening to the podcast. I learned about the actor Robert Walden writing that episode that I did, which I was like, that's crazy.
Yeah, who would have known?
Yeah.
I actually reached out to a friend of mine who was a staff writer on Who's the Boss, and asked him what that was all about. And he had he didn't join the writing staff until later.
Until later.
He's like, that's weird. I have no idea how that would have happened.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've reached out to a couple of the writers. I heard back from Karen Wengrod, just asked a few questions about, because she would have been on when you did your stint there for sure. But yeah, and I was surprised to find that there were so many married couples who wrote for that show.
Oh, is that right? I knew there was a couple.
Yeah, because
there were several writing teams. Yeah, and some of them were just 2-guy platonic writing team.
Right.
I remember there were these 2 guys that I don't remember who they were, but every episode they would come up to me afterwards, at the taping, and they'd say, "Hey, listen, are you by any chance available to do a spinoff?" And I go, "Yeah,
yes,
absolutely,
yes,
okay, great, stay tuned," and then nothing. And so the second episode, I did the second episode, and the same 2 guys walked up to me and said, "Hey, listen, are you by any chance available?" I said, "Yes." And they're like, "Great, stay tuned." I'm like, "Okay, I don't think I'm going to be hearing from it." It was just the thing that they said to me every time I did.
Yeah, I mean, they were probably trying to get something.
They probably tried to get it going, and then nobody bit,
Yeah. But yeah, there was Bill and Sherry Steinkellner in the beginning, Prudence Fraser and Robert Sternham. were married,
Mhm.
and then Karen Wingrad and Ken Cinnamon were married, and I think there's another couple that comes in later on.
Interesting.
But I thought that was interesting.
And it works for the show because
yeah,
it's all about essentially a marriage, right? So,
right, yeah, it's a good family dynamic.
I could see that happening. Two writers, and then they meet. You know what I mean? And then they
yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Like it's the same thing, and then they become a team,
Right.
Team,
Yeah,
it's kind of neat, actually.
and then they argue for the rest of their
And,
lives.
and the question is, are any of these writing teams still married to each other?
Probably not. But
The ones that I found are, yes, they are. All
Oh,
three
really?
of them still are, I believe. Yes.
The other like a little piece of trivia I remembered that I could share about Mason was just that in the original script, so that would have been the Big Man on Campus script.
Mhm.
The first draft, his name was, because it was Mason Peters later, but in the first draft, his name was Mason Petard. And my guess is it was a network note. Like, no.
mhm.
Right.
It rhymed with things that were offensive
Mhm.
and it seemed a little weird. And I think it was like, the next thing I know, Peters in the second draft,
Nice.
And if Tony ever had to say it, he would have messed it up.
Right.
Because he messes up. We've noticed that, like,
Yeah, we have noticed that
the
there
Internet
are.
Movie Database will list somebody's name, and he says it slightly different.
Yes.
It was a
All I
few of
remember
those.
was that he was always, for the longest time, he was always Tony in everything he did.
Oh,
Yeah.
Tony on Taxi,
Tony
Tony
Banta.
was the boss, Tony in I think the movies with was one of the, was it him and a chimpanzee? What am I?
Oh yeah, we have not seen that, but I
I
have
think
heard
he
of
was
it.
Tony in that. Like, he was
Probably
always
was.
Was he Tony in Love Boat? I don't remember.
He was not Tony in Love Boat.
Oh,
we
was he not?
watched that recently.
On Love Boat, he was Bud.
Oh, that's right.
We just watched that recently. Also on Paramount Plus.
So you work for Paramount Plus. That's very cool.
Yeah, I work for Viacom CBS, and I'm a product manager for the Paramount Plus streaming apps.
I did. So I worked on that lot a lot when I was a kid because, Cheers was on that lot. Family
Mhm.
Ties was on that lot. And then I did a show called The Bronx Zoo with Ed
Oh,
Asner.
yeah, I saw that.
And so there was New York Street at Paramount.
Mhm.
And so it was like a inner city New York high school. And so I did like a whole season of that there.
Was
that
that,
was like my-
Radford or TV City?
No, it was the Paramount lot on Melrose.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Oh, right, that
Oh,
makes
yeah,
sense
Paramount.
because
Right.
sorry, because
No,
I started off as CBS and now we're Viacom CBS, so now we're
Right,
Paramount.
now
as
that's
well, yeah.
Plus.
And there was another show with Bess Armstrong called All Is Forgiven that I did like maybe a couple of weeks after I did Cheers. So it was, or vice versa. So and they were like, the sound stages were right next to each other.
Right.
So that lot was sort of a home away from home for me when I was
Right.
a kid. So I have fond memories of the place.
Now across the street from Sunset Gower is where Netflix is, right?
Are
No,
they there now?
well, Sunset
Oh no,
Bronson. I'm
it's
sorry,
Netflix.
Sunset Gower has the Netflix building.
Oh,
All the
okay, so
Netflix
they
is
have
right
the
there.
Netflix
It's
building.
on that
What
lot.
you see across the street from Sunset Gower was the spaghetti factory where I would get drunk in high school. So
Yeah.
because they wouldn't card you.
Do you see what happened
Ah.
to that building?
I don't actually know what happened to that building.
Well, they built somebody came in and built a condo on top of it. It's like I don't know, it's probably 20 or whatever stories. And they said, whatever you do, you have to keep the spaghetti factory the way it was considered a
like a
Landmark.
historic landmark.
historic landmark. Thank you. And so they said, you can't change the facade, the outside. And they're like, great, that's fine, we'll do it. They leveled the whole, they ruined everything and did what they wanted. Then all the people signed leases, moved in, or bought the properties or whatever, or maybe it was rental. They all had to move out because then the city was like, no, this is not what you were. So now it's a big empty building. Yeah, it's crazy. And it looks nothing like the spaghetti factory.
I have to drive by it at some point. Like I spent a lot of time there in high school. So
Did you? Yeah, I hear a lot of stories about
Now,
that.
wait
I
a minute,
work
I
near there,
thought-
so.
I thought you weren't a delinquent living on
a
your
little
own.
bit of a delinquent, but not a huge delinquent. But I just remember that at some point I don't know if this was true or not, but a bartender there told me that they were not allowed to card people. He's like, we were just told we're not allowed to card people. Like we
That's
don't,
Hollywood.
if you ask, we'll serve you. And they were the only restaurant in town at that point that would still take a check. And for some reason, like I never had cash. I was a teenager. I had a checkbook.
Right.
What teenager has a checkbook? I'm like writing checks to the spaghetti factory for like spaghetti and like melon balls.
That's hilarious.
Because like that's what you drink when you're in high school. You drink Midori. Like
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Oh, that's so funny.
Well, thank you so much. This has been really great. I don't want to take.
Absolutely, anytime, and I'm looking forward to hearing the podcast about the episode.
Great. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Nice.